5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
So every other year I've walked on stage and I haven't done anything, and there's been spontaneous applause, which I love getting applauded for things I had nothing to do with. I realize you're really applauding for the video, and I had absolutely nothing to do with that, but I'll take it. So welcome to the Now What Conference 2015. This is our third year. We're very, very excited that you're here. When we look through the pictures of this event, we have a professional photographer, this gentleman over here actually, roaming around taking pictures. Whenever we looked at pictures through the event, I could always tell what year the event was by the jacket that I was wearing. So it's a blue jacket or it's a beige jacket. And then this morning, to my horror, I realized I only had 2 jackets. So I wore a polo, and I have no sleeves coming under here, and that's how I know that the pictures from this event are from the third year. We started off yesterday. We had a group of workshops. How many people attended workshops yesterday? Hey, fantastic. If you didn't attend the workshops yesterday, be sure to sign up for those next year. They always sell out, and they're absolutely fantastic. We have a whole lot of people. This was our strongest year for ticket sales. We have people from all over the country. We even have somebody, and I'll dare him to raise his hand, that flew his private plane in this morning. Mark, where are you at? There he is. He flew his plane in. I saw him in the lobby. I said, hey, when did you get in? Expecting like last night. He got in 5 minutes ago and came here from the airport after he landed his plane. So, we have a great group of speakers. We have 7 speakers plus me to talk to you. We kind of airlifted the East Coast in here. We have 2 speakers in from Boston. We have 1 in from New Hampshire. We have 1 in from Maryland. And then we did get a token West Coast person from somewhere around Vancouver. I picked up Margot at the airport yesterday, and she told me that there's going to be a whole bunch of Red Sox references, and nobody's going to use any R's. And this is the point where I would do a really, really bad Boston accent, but I will spare you that. Just a couple housekeeping items. We do have a tech lounge out in the lobby. I don't know if you saw it off the lobby. If you have to take a phone call or you want to do some work, there's some tables and comfortable places to sit there if you want to go out there. The Wi-Fi is now what? And we got smart this year and we took the password off. A couple of years we had problems working through the password, and then we sat down this year and we thought, who would want to steal our Wi-Fi and why would we care? So there's no password on the Wi-Fi this year. The hashtag is NowWhat15. So if you're tweeting this, we'd appreciate it if you'd use that hashtag. And I'd just like to mention sponsors. We had a great group of sponsors this year. 2 of the content management systems that Blend works with, primarily Easy Systems and Episerver, are both our gold sponsors this year. And we have 2 silver sponsors. User Interface Engineering's All You Can Learn program is one of our silver sponsors, as is Argus Leader Media, so we're very, very thankful for that. I'm going to talk briefly for a bit and then turn it over to Margot, but we are going to go back in time to when this conference started in 2012. 2.5 years ago in 2012, we started planning out what would become the 2013 version of this conference. And I remember the meeting. It was me, and it was Carla, and it was my niece, Rachel, who was sitting in the front row right there. She was interning at Blend at the time, and we sat down to plan this conference out. And this was the logo for this conference in 2013. And every time Carla's seen my deck and she sees this logo, she tells me that's not the right logo, and I have to remind her that this was the logo for 2013, not for this year. And the thing I didn't want to say is that the logos look the same to me. And you never say that to a designer ever, is what I've learned, right? The logos look the same to me. But she always tells me, no, that's not the right logo. And I'm like, well, this is the logo from 2 years ago. When we sat down to plan this conference out, we knew we wanted to do an event in Sioux Falls. We went to a lot of conferences and we thought, we could bring some great things back to Sioux Falls. We wanted to do an event in Sioux Falls, but we didn't quite know what the theme should be. We didn't know what the event should be about. So what we did is we sent out a questionnaire to a bunch of our clients. And in fact, some of you in this room may have gotten that. And we asked our clients, we said, if you wanted a conference in Sioux Falls and you wanted to learn some things, what would you want to learn about? And really, the theme that we got back from people was don't tell me how to build a website. which was hard for us because Blend is a web development firm. We build websites for a living. But what people were saying is, I have a website. I'm not embarking on a big new website build. Don't tell me how to build a website. Rather, tell me how to use the one I have. And so what we did, we realized that this wasn't a conference really about building websites as much as it was a conference about running websites, and that's where the tagline came from. Now what? You have a website, now what? And we've used that over the years to kind of program the conference. Our first year, we had Lisa Welchman and Seth Gottlieb in to talk about governance and web operations. How many people, just a second, show of hands if you've been to all 3 Now What conferences? Hey, that's awesome. Okay, so you've seen all these people. So this was Seth Gottlieb and Lisa Welchman in the first year. The second year, we had Jeff Cram talking about website optimization. We have Jeff Sauer talking about Google Analytics. This year, we have Jared Spool in to talk about making design decisions over time, and we have Carl Fast talking about agile project development. And what all of these talks have in common, I believe after this year, we will have run 24 sessions through Now What. They've been about web operations, not necessarily about building websites, about web projects. And that's an important point that we want to get across, is that really web projects are not web operations. And that's an important thing to understand because the project gets all the attention, gets all the glamour, much more so than the ongoing operations. When you're doing a web project, you have a finish line. You have started that project, you are working through that project, and then that project is going to end at some point in the future. So really what that project is a temporary state of being, and that project is eventually going to end. And what's going to happen there is what you have to do is really just going to stretch ahead into the future. It's going to become a web operation, and there really is no end to that. And that can be difficult for a lot of people to transition to. I don't know where this picture was taken. This looks a lot like the middle of South Dakota. Who has ever driven from here to Rapid City? Right. I maintain that somewhere just after the river, there's this hidden vehicular treadmill that you get on, and you're still driving, but the car's just not going anywhere because you're spinning on this treadmill. But this is really what web operations look like. And the fact is, any web project that you're in eventually is going to launch, and it's going to become an operation. And that means there are 2 very big changes when you transition from a web project to a web operation. Because the fact is, projects are bookended by start and end dates. Like I said, a project is a temporary state of being. You started this project, you are working through this project, and eventually this project is going to end. So if it's a very, very unpleasant experience, you always have to look forward to that moment when that project will end. Additionally, there are very, very defined methodologies to get from the start to the finish of a project. There's an organization, PMI, the Project Management Institute, that specializes in project management methodology. They confer a certification called a PMP, a Project Management Professional. Do we have any PMPs in the audience today? Anybody's a PMP? We don't have any. It's a very, very hard certification to get. But there's a very refined body of knowledge for how to work through a project. So when you're working on a web project, you have a start date, you have an end date, and you have a very defined set of methodologies to get through that project. And then you get to the end of that project and you launch. And it's fantastic. We got through the project, we have launched, it's all done. Let's have a massive party to celebrate the fact that we got through the end of the project, we reached our finish line and we launched. And then the party ends. And you wake up the next morning with a lampshade on your head, and you look around, and you think, holy cow, what am I going to do now? I love Saturday Night Live. I've been a huge fan of SNL since I was like 15 years old. And in the fall of 2008 was the election between John McCain and President Obama. And Sarah Palin was his running mate. And this was heyday for Saturday Night Live because Tina Fey did this fantastic Sarah Palin impression. Ratings for Saturday Night Live in the fall of 2008 were just absolutely off the charts. And then the election happened. And so the whole Sarah Palin kind of went into hiding or something. And I just lost my mic, and now it's back. And Paul Rudd was the first host after the election had ended. And he referred to this in the monologue, and I think there's a lot of parallels with what happens when we go from a project to an operation. So Paul Rudd, the first monologue after the election, being on SNL right now is being in Times Square on New Year's Day when everybody has left and there's garbage on the ground. Right? And so this is the day after your project launches. He said, being here now is like winning an Oscar, one of those technical Oscars that they give out at a hotel. And so this is the day after. So the project's wrapped, and now we've moved into web operations, and really people are standing around and nobody quite knows what to do. The characteristics of operations and how they very, very much differ from your project is that operations really lose some of the glamour. When you're in a website project, especially towards the end, all of the attention is on your project. You are probably getting an enormous amount of attention from the organization. You're probably getting a lot of attention from the C-level. It can be a very glamorous thing, assuming it's going well. Operations also lose the focus at the end. Like I said, a project has a launch date, it has a finish date. We have a date we're going to start, a date we're going to end, and we always have that date in the future that we're working towards, and that's very, very clarifying for us. Operations lose staff. If you have a big website project, you might be swimming in staff. You may have developers all over the place and content strategists and designers. And on day 2, a lot of them will leave and get reassigned to other projects. Either they were contractors and your contract is now over, or they're doing something else in the organization. Just operations lose budget. A project, especially a project that goes poorly, that just pour money into it. And somehow that money doesn't make it past the launch date. After that website launches, the budget kind of dries up. And some organizations, they don't think, well, we need to have a budget ongoing to fund our website operations. Also, projects have the luxury of being strategic, and this is very, very important. When people are tearing down something and build something new, they have the luxury of being very strategic about that. They can step back and they can look at their business and their processes from a very, very long view and determine what is the best way to do something. When I was a kid, anybody play Risk? Risk when they were kids? I used to love this game, right? So you'd move little armies around on the battlefield. This was pre-Xbox. We didn't have anything like that. So we played Risk, and you could move armies around, and you could be super, super strategic, and you were like an armchair general. And this is what a project is like. You're stepping back, and you're making large-scale decisions about the future of your web presence, and you're being very, very strategic. You have that luxury. Operations end up being tactical. When you are working in an operation, you end up fighting fires. You know those days where you get into the office and at the end of the day, you realize you did nothing that you planned to do at the beginning of the day. You did nothing but fight fires that popped up throughout the day. So they end up being tactical. They don't have the luxury of being strategic. So before we were playing Risk, which was great, now we are playing whack-a-mole. So things are coming up and we're kind of fighting fires all through the day. This is my 3rd presentation at Now What, and every year I've had a cat slide. And so here's your gratuitous cat slide to illustrate whack-a-mole. I love how gently he's like tapping the kittens down, because this could be a horrifying video if he was just smacking those cats down. But it's like so gently like tapping this. And doesn't one of them escape at some point? This is an animated GIF, so roll, but I think one of them escapes at one point. I could be wrong. So anyway, this is what we do, is we play whack-a-mole with all these problems that come up. And when the day is over, we really have gotten no farther. So I'm just going to sit here and bask in the glory of this cat slide. Okay, we're done there. So what we need is a plan, and we need more than a plan, actually. What we really need is we need a framework. We need a framework on which we can hang the specifics of our web project. Back in the late 1800s, they came up with the idea of building skeletons for buildings. Previously, when they built skyscrapers, the walls actually held up the building. They would have these massive stone walls, and they would put timbers across, and that actually held the weight in the building. And the walls at the bottom of the building had to be like 8 feet wide to hold up the weight of the building. But what they did in the late 1800s is they decided they would build a steel framework, and then they would hang the specifics of the building on the outside. So that's when we got things like concrete and glass. We got glass. Glass can't hold a building. It works because it's hung on a steel framework. And so what we need to do is come up with a framework that we can hang the specifics of our project on. So what we are working through 2015, and what I'm really here to kind of announce, is what we're calling the Blend Web Operations Framework. And what this is going to be is a defined plan and a defined methodology to help you run web operations after launch. If you're one of our clients, you may have seen this document. This is how this idea got started, is we have had what we call the Web Operations Management Checklist at Blend. We've had this since about 2011. It's a checklist of about 50 items that you need to account for when you are running a website. From, if someone wants new content on the website, who do they talk to? If someone wants to redesign the website, who do they talk to? If a form submission comes in, who responds to that? And this is a big checklist, but it doesn't go far enough. It worked. You've probably seen this if you're one of our clients, and if you want this, just email me and I'll be happy to send it to you. But this is kind of what we started with, and we thought we needed to go further than that. So the Blend Web Operations Framework that we're going to be building out through the rest of 2015, we are going to define 4 things: the roles, the events, the tasks, and the artifacts that make up web operations. So we're going to define the roles. The roles are obviously people, but more abstractly, roles are really bundles of responsibilities applied to people. So the relationship between a role and a person is not one-to-one. You may have the role of a system administrator and the role of a developer that are really fulfilled by the same person. Even more abstractly, is roles are really actions that produce an intended outcome. You have an intended outcome of server stability. And there's a bundle of responsibilities and actions that roll up to a system administrator. And what we're going to do is define them. We're going to define the team. And we've done some work on this spring. This is in draft, our roles of web operations. But what we've defined the roles is the 2 gross categories of management and execution. Management, setting the vision. These are people like the CMO and the CEO. And strategy are things like the web manager, the director of digital strategy. And then on the execution side, these are the people that actually do the work. That sounds terribly condescending, but people manage and people execute. A developer and a system administrator manages the technology. Content is things like a content strategist and a writer. You probably see, some of you are seeing your titles up here. Design are things like a designer, a specialist. Operations, we have community managers or maybe just a marketing assistant that assists in the operation of the website. And then finally, in optimization, we have a digital marketing strategist or a web marketer. I am losing my microphone, but I have a very loud voice, so bear with me. So those are the roles that we're going to define for web operations. Additionally, we're going to talk about the events and the tasks. We're kind of bundling these together for now. We'll split them out a little more later as this develops. But we're going to talk about things that happen. There are things that happen in the life of a website that we really had no control over. A form submission came in, or the website went down, or we had some technical issue. And then there are things that we proactively do. So if the website were to go down, we have a technical problem, that's obviously not something that we did. That's something that happened to us. But then we do things like meetings and analysis. These are things that source from the web team and things that they do. And these can be ad hoc. So someone wants to add something to the website. This was something that nobody knew about before, and we have to do now. Or they can be scheduled. And these things are like the monthly web strategy meeting or the weekly web operations meeting. So the events and the tasks. And then finally, we're going to talk about the artifacts. And the artifacts are persistent things that we produce. And these are things like documents. Do we do an analytical report once a week, once a month? What does this document look like? Reports, code, and media. When this stuff gets generated, what is it for? Who needs to see it? Where does it go? How does it persist over the life of the website? So, roles, events, tasks, and artifacts. Those are the four things that we're going to define that we think really make up an effective web operation strategy. The schedule for how this is going to happen. Roles are in draft now. We've drafted our version of what the framework roles look like. Events, tasks, and artifacts are coming this summer. And we're going to do a beta release this fall. And that's going to take the form of a website. It'll be a Blend Interactive website. And if you have ever been to an OWOT conference, you are on our mailing list, you'll get a link to this when it comes out, which we will list all these things. And in some ways, this is both a checklist that you can look at and hopefully implement some of these things, but also it's what we would consider a maturity model. We are going to survey people that are running successful websites, find out what they do, and document these best practices so you can gauge the maturity of your organization against this standard. And then we'll be reaching out for testers in the fall. Once we come up with a framework that we think is going to work, in 2016, we're going to spend 2016 testing that and figuring out what works and what doesn't. By the end of 2016, we should have a battle-tested operations framework that people are using in production. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up this now, and the reason why we're doing this at the very beginning of the conference, is that this framework is going to drive the future of this conference series. When I was planning out the speakers, I'm in charge of the curriculum of this series, and when I was planning this out, it was a little tough this year because I started to look at, we knew people for the first 2 years that we absolutely wanted to come speak, that we had heard speak, but this year we had kind of a blank slate, and I had to sit down and think, where's this conference going? What disciplines should we be teaching people? And that's where we came up with the idea for this framework. We thought we can identify these disciplines, we can identify an effective operations framework, and we can use that to plan the future of the series. We can bring speakers in that speak to specific aspects of that framework. So this framework is going to define really the future of this series in 2016 and beyond. So stay tuned for that. That is all I have. I'm going to turn it over to Margot and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.